Welcome back to my garden. Well, the storm around Will Smith just raged on and on and on. And certainly in my little news feed, everyone seemed to be saying pretty much the same sort of thing. It is, after all, as many people like to point out, the internet is something of an echo chamber, and one's algorithmic feed very much bears that out. So no one was pointing out or questioning the actual comedic quality of this style of humour, this mocking, finger poking and name calling. And really, I think perhaps they should. Don't want to suggest that these should be taboos or there should be strict lines of engagement. For too long, perhaps, that was the case, and certainly from the 70s onwards, before comedians started to use language and choose subjects that really flew in the face of what was supposed to be decent or right. But I'm not really talking about that. So, let me give you some, sort of flesh it out a little bit. Do I think sort of physical name calling should be off limits to comedians? Well, no. But I think it's a lot funnier when it's sort of directed in a way that speaks truth to power or knocks people off pedestals when that needs to be done. So in that sense, kind of when Donald was the president, well, sure, poke fun at him. But it seemed to me that poking fun at his inability to remember key facts was one thing, and this laboured and continual sort of mocking of his somewhat bizarre hairstyle served less purpose. And actually, I think undermined whatever point the comedians were trying to actually make, valid points. And another area where the sort of physical mockery really has a place is when it's done in a way that is essentially self-deprecating. I remember hearing Michael J. Fox talk about this, and it was sort of how one of the ways that he kind of developed his abilities as a comedian or as a comedic actor. He'd find himself at parties, and before some sort of lumbering jock could poke fun at his 5'4" stature, he would kind of announce himself with a string of hilarious kind of self-put-downs about his height. And it kind of was disarming, what could anyone else say that was funnier than something he'd already said? And in fact, if they tried, they just ended up looking silly. The tables were turned. So that whole idea of self-deprecation, to me, is a wonderful area when mockery seems to be quite enhanced in its comedic effect. Actually, these two sorts of points came in useful to me as a school teacher, and they're two instances that really stick out in my mind. And the first was way back when I was working in Peru. one of my earliest classes had a chap, Oscar, who was a brilliant mimic. I mean, he really could take off any voice. And one day he had us all in stitches, copying the voice of the head of my department. And it was very funny. And dear old Mr. Bodimede had quite a nasally sort of voice, and Oscar did it perfectly. So I asked him, I mean, naturally, and well, can you do me? And it turns out he could, and that also had people laughing. And I went away, and I got back to him quietly when he was on his own, and hatched a little plan. So the next lesson, we started off with an example, but before I could get to the board and do any teaching, up strode Oscar, and he delivered the example, which I'd shown him in advance, in my voice, and ripping to shreds every element of my teaching style. And frankly, it was hilarious. And of course, served a wonderful purpose. You know, the class was engaged. They were laughing, you know, at my foibles and my voice. But they were learning because they were engaged. So I was delighted. But if I'm truly honest, I mean, it was a risky or I don't want to say courageous, but maybe that's almost a word, thing to do, because that's a thing that I've actually been quite sensitive about. So if I go back to when when my family emigrated from England to South Africa as a little 7-year-old, I can remember very clearly walking into class and children mercilessly, cruelly mocking me because of my sort of Hertfordshire, England English accent. And in particular, of course, I arrived there and I had a little tendency, which was apparently quite common where I'd grown up, of struggling with my R's. It was Wodger Wabbit. Over time, and thanks to a quite brilliant speech therapist at the school, I overcame that sort of problem. But the sort of isolation that you feel when a large group of people mock you for your accent, well, I think that stuck beneath the skin for quite some time afterwards. And in fact, even now, it's something that does annoy me. And it's very common. You know, it's common where I live. People sort of mimic the way that I speak Portuguese sometimes. And they don't mean anything by it, but it is very, very annoying. So, it was a sensitive point for me, but in the context, the way it was done, well, it was hilarious and wonderfully effective. And the second time, this whole sort of idea, and sort of this is a little bit more along the lines of the speaking truth to power or knocking people off their pedestal. My second story relates to something that I'd written in Peru and my class had performed, but I trotted it out again in Sao Paulo at St. Paul's. It was a play that I'd written, a short play, Pythagoras, a Murder Mystery, which was sort of amusing and was about the theorem of Pythagoras, and it was sort of set in ancient Greece and also in a classroom. And I'd written it and we used it for those open days when the department was called to put something on, and it was a lot less obvious what you were going to do in the maths department that would engage the parents. And this play worked wonders. And one of the characters was a teacher. And my Form 3 class performed the piece. And Bruna played the teacher, and she played it brilliantly. Of course, she absolutely exaggerated everything, and the lines were a little bit of me anyway. This incessant babbling is starting to get on my nerves, was the sort of thing that pompous old me was prone to say in a classroom. And Bruna said it just like I would have. And just in case the children or parents didn't get the joke, she made it clear it was me by borrowing one of my jackets, which was far too big for her, and wearing one of my comic ties. It was something of a trademark. And once again, very funny and very well received. But I think in all of that, the humour, certainly in those two cases, came very much with the consent of me that I was giving, and also the context that it was put in. And I kind of think, going around a room of, for example, people who are vain and puffed up about their looks, and perhaps talking about plastic surgery is one thing. The hairstyles maybe less so, and certainly in the case that I spoke about last week, no, I don't think it's particularly funny at all. It did amuse me that one of the internet characters that sort of went off all guns blazing was Joe Rogan, and he seemed to side much more with on the line of the comedian rather than the would-be martial artist, which is funny given that he's has a foot in both camps. So that's about it. What more remains to be said? Or perhaps that was far too much. At any rate, at least the sort of the volume in my news feed is starting to slow down. I think we've moved on to a new story, and that one will be trotted out later on when there's some sort of suitable prompt, whether it's the next round of award dinners when all the comedians will make jokes about it, fair enough, or the next time Will Smith puts his foot in it. I guess one question, though, that it's provoked for me is what could I do about it? I mean, I made my little video, such as it is. Well, that obviously didn't change anything. And why would it? And life just goes on because, and it doesn't matter because it's just words they will have us believe. And I guess on a certain level they're right. What can we do? Well, I guess one thing that it made me realise I could do is just tune out. And this is a very important point. I've actually started doing this in a much bigger way. I want to find more time to do the things that I love doing. And one way is following the advice of a sort of internet influencer Tim Ferriss, reduce my news feed and attention span to 15 minutes a day, no more. And to be quite honest, 15 minutes of the BBC tells me all I need to know. And that seems to be a healthy move in the right direction. And if one reduces the sort of amount of content one's consuming, then I guess one becomes a little bit more choosy about what you're actually going to watch. Maybe that's a lesson for all of us. That's it for this week. Trust your lives are filled with joy, you're keeping safe, and until next week, and I promise no news of Will Smith or anything related to that, Until next week, ciao from a sunny Brazil.